going to unpack all of these ideas in great detail with specific examples across cloud, software, infrastructure, services, but we wanted to share upfront what we see as some of the fundamental differences in the technology ecosystem from the way things used to be. And so we have these three things here. If it's 1 o'clock where you are and you need to run away because you haven't had lunch yet, at least get these three ideas in your head. First of all, the companies we cover are not only partnering differently, they're investing in new ways, and they're looking for more from their ecosystem partners. Part of that change has been driven by clients demanding it, not just the partners looking at each other and wanting more, but the clients themselves demanding it, saying, bring me a well-managed ecosystem solution. Don't try and tell me you can do it all. Don't tell me that you'll work with anybody. And then the last part is the leading companies that we cover are doing some very specific things that we're going to get into. And those are things that others can emulate if they're willing. So with that, let me just, let's have us introduce ourselves, and we'll start with Angela.
Great. Hi, everyone. This is Angela Lambert speaking. I'm a principal analyst here at TBR, and I focus on IT infrastructure and devices.
Great. Hi, everyone. Allan, Krans. I'm Angela's counterpart on the cloud and software side of the research.
And I'm Patrick Heffernan. I'm their counterpart that looks at services. So we're going to come at it from all three different angles, and we're going to start, first of all, with services. So IT services companies and consultancies. So when I say that, I mean the companies from the spectrum of McKinsey on one end to Wipro on the other end have always been orchestrators, dependent on others' technologies as part of their own value proposition. Traditionally, this has required a technology agnostic approach, with the IT services companies and the consultancies professing no preference for SAP versus Oracle, Azure versus AWS, all that. It was always a little bit more fiction than it was for real, but the idea was we'll work with anybody's technology depending on what the client is asking for. Those days are gone. They have been ushered out by a combination of different factors. First, as enterprise buyers listened to the consultants and became much more savvy about making IT part of the business, not just a cost center, but part of the business, those same IT buyers cared less and less about technical qualifications and more about business value. So these buyers are saying, don't give me a list of all the possible solutions, but tell me which ones will have the greatest business impact. And one element of that, of course, is the commercial, the IP, the skills relationships between the IT services companies and their technology partners. So you're going to get a better business impact out of a set of partners who are already more closely aligned themselves. We also saw a period, probably on the back of the pendulum swing of this now, when buyers were looking to their technology partners, looking to their hyperscalers for advice on who to work with among the IT services companies and consultancies. So if you already had AWS and you were going to do another migration, another upgrade, you might ask your AWS counterpart or the person you're working with at AWS, who should I go to for this? So the services companies had to make a positive case for why they ought to be recommended by an AWS. So maintaining a technology agnostic approach in those circumstances meant really losing out on opportunities because the hyperscalers or others didn't know how to recommend you. And lastly, IT services companies and consultancies have increasingly recognized that half to sometimes 3/4 of their revenue comes through their technology alliances, and typically with just a handful or maybe up to 10 partners. If you look at Accenture as a great example, they partner with seemingly everybody, hundreds of partners, but it's really only about a top 6 or 7 for them that make up about half of their revenue. So if opportunities and revenue growth depend on your certifications, your skills, your quals, your relationships with a select few technology partners, you're going to invest more heavily in them, and you're going to move away from the long-time fiction of being technology agnostic. So that's the world we're in now. And so what are the successful companies doing in that now no longer technology agnostic world? First, identifying very clearly what technology partners expect from them. We recently heard a market-leading software company, SAP, say that they look for 3 things from their consulting partners. They look that the consulting partners know their portfolio, they innovate with them, and they bring industry knowledge. that's a great starting point. And if there's questions in the Q&A about what exactly know your portfolio means, I can go into that in a lot of detail. It's a very specific thing that they were looking for, and much broader than just the sort of know what we bring to the table. And again, it's a starting point, but the more successful companies have been looking at every alliance partner, every relationship, and asking, what can we do that separates us? And I'll come back to that thought in just a moment. The second thing that we're seeing the more successful IT services companies and consultancies do is some very basic blocking and tackling, like sales alignment. And by alignment, I don't mean exactly the same org structures and compensation models. That would be completely impossible. I mean, understanding each partner's organization and comp model so that the motivations and the incentives make sense, especially when you're out in the field in front of clients. Joint go-to-market, pretty straightforward. Although honestly, joint go-to-market efforts are not done as often as you might expect. And then the last, of course, is training and training and training and training. And one quick side note for folks that are on this listening from the technology companies themselves, when you're looking at your services partners, IT services companies and consultancies depend on their people being busy all the time. If you can incentivize them to use any of their downtime on your training, that's a win-win-win, possibly a win-win-win-win. I don't know what the fourth element would be, but it feels like it's so good that it must be true. Okay, last point. I mentioned this before, this idea that IT services companies and consultancies are trying to stand out in the crowd. And it's an age-old thing around differentiation. But when you step back and think about it, I mean, how many SAP SIs are there? Countless. How many consultancies have a Microsoft practice? Virtually every one. What we're seeing the leading companies do is actually pretty straightforward. It's ensuring that their technology partners understand what makes them, the IT services company or the consultancy, special. So when a client asks, your cloud partner says, yeah, you should work with these guys because they do this thing you need really well. Or the worst part would be that the cloud partner saying, no, they're all pretty much the same. Pick any one of them. So yes, IT services companies and consultancies have become incredibly adept at determining which cloud provider or software is the best fit for any given IT environment or sub-industry or business need or whatever the use case might be. The IT services companies and the consultancies are really good at that part. What the really successful ones are doing now is ensuring that their technology partners also know what's the best fit for the services side of that equation. And I can explain that if there's questions in the Q&A exactly what I mean, but really it comes down to and this is the question that we ask all the time when we talk to alliances leaders at GSIs and consultancies, can your technology partners sell you? Do they know what distinct value that you, the IT services company and the consultancy, bring to the table every time? And with that, I will hand it over to Allan.
Great. Thanks, Patrick. So as we transition into the cloud portion of this presentation, I think the overarching thing that sums up a lot of this to me is the African proverb of, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And with the cloud market in particular, as it developed over the past decade plus, it's been a lot of going fast, right? A lot of direct sales, migrations, increased consumption. That really drove a lot of the growth, for quite some time, longer than perhaps we thought, with the COVID-19 pandemic giving it a jolt, when really we expected it to slow down more quickly. But what we were seeing is, that going alone, driving a lot of growth on their own, that has petered out quite a bit. And it's led to more of a focus on doing things together. And up until a couple of years ago, it was around the enterprise solutions, things that for a lot of organizations weren't intuitive to move to the cloud, weren't easy, weren't things that were a short, quick project that with a minimal amount of service could be transitioned to a different environment. So drove a lot of the consulting, a lot of the data platform activity, a lot of the enterprise change management, all those things that go into those bigger engagements, which were areas of growth, but definitely required a whole ecosystem with SI partners, as well as a number of different technologies coming together and working well in a production deployment. Those are all things that they need to take a step back, really look at actively partnering and broadening their purview beyond just the platforms or the one specific application that they were providing. Coming into 2024 and into 2025, the interest around AI, I think, is another reminder of that proverb where there was a lot of kind of early easy growth, a lot of interest among enterprises, a lot of investments that were able to be made in a pretty quick way to get experience and get kind of grow their competency with this new emerging technology that by all regards should be transformative for the industry. But again, that petered out a lot more quickly, but enterprises are taking a step back and looking at the right value equation for AI use cases, the right data platforms, the right security and governance. All those things are being worked through before the next wave of big investment growth around AI and Gen AI can really take place. So it's a little bit of a rebuilding investment time. And if we look at the graph on the left, it illustrates, especially for the hyperscale platforms where in the early days, a lot of those solutions are residing, a lot of the models and the model training is occurring. And so to support that at scale, if we thought the investments were huge for competing in the cloud before, it's even amplified 2, 3 to 4 times more. And those build outs are going to take quite some time to occur. So it is about looking at working together with a broader ecosystem to justify these investments and really make good on the promises of Gen AI for enterprises. Is not something that any one vendor is going to be able to do. And it's a diverse set of partners, even more diverse than just for the underlying cloud and application solutions that were being implemented today. That's all occurring, I think, in real time in 2025. It's a big kind of not only building out the data centers, but investing in the alliances, the certifications, the skills that can be demonstrated for within industries, all that nuance that really goes before big investments in scaling out some of these businesses. That's all happening. So in the meantime, we do expect the cloud market to slow down a bit, even as the activity and the investment and these partnership activities pick up during the year. Some of the things that are kind of a drag on growth, the scale, even when we came into this year, we couldn't have expected the degree of uncertainty in so many aspects of world activity and politics and economic activity. So I think that fear, that apprehensiveness for big decisions that are going to take place in an environment that's very uncertain, I think that's even more of a factor today in terms of, especially in certain industries. Then there's also hybrid activity around mixed deployments, especially around AI. We've seen more interest in multimodal deployments for AI, some in public cloud. Those are the easier ones to implement and get up and running, but more interest in private cloud than we've seen in quite some time around the variety of workloads that are out there. So those types of data models, which can be very expensive to run purely in a public cloud environment, are driving more consideration of mixed and on-prem deployments than we've seen for quite some time. And then repatriation, this is really a smaller aspect of it, but we have talked to a number of enterprises that expect the proportion of their cloud environments to decrease pretty significantly in some cases over the next 3 years as they take a look at their data landscape, as there's more pressure around the spending environment and looking at efficiency, as well as grappling with the security and controls that come with deploying AI into data sets that can be sensitive and subject to regulation. So all that is a long-winded way of saying that partnerships and looking at joint solutions and joint go-to-market, I think is more, it's a more fertile environment for that type of approach than it has been for quite some time on the cloud vendor side. And there's going to be a lot of investment, not only in the data centers that drive those big investment bars in the graph up in the left, but in the softer types of investments between different organizations than we've seen historically. And not all of it takes place on the front end of these engagements. So it's not all about just partnering with some of the big SIs to do the consulting and lay the groundwork for new solutions and migrations and cloud implementations. Especially, I think AI has shown a spotlight on the underlying data platform, the controls, the security, and all that uncertainty that goes with the regulatory environment, especially in a global enterprise. So digging into, really hardening more of the certification, training, partnership alliance with a set of vendors that is not just on the front end of these applications, but really down at those deep data levels to overcome. When we look at the big adoption barriers for Gen AI, there's a number of different ones that are highlighted, but they all go back to this common theme of doing it in a way that's secure, that the data is clean and reliable and can be used to get to some of these agentic solutions that are really not just calling out insights, but taking action and automating aspects of the organization that save costs, drive revenue, all the outcomes that people want, doing it with fewer human resources, and leveraging that for a more automated enterprise, a more intelligent enterprise is top of mind for all of the conversations we're having with customers that are actively investing in and planning on AI being a bigger part of their organization going forward. So with that, I'll hand it over to Angela.
Great, thanks, Allan. So from here, I will talk a bit about how we have seen IT infrastructure vendors changing their partnership approach. And a lot of what we see in terms of the evolution, unsurprisingly, is focused in the realm of AI. So that's where we'll focus today. And what we're seeing are vendors being more selective about who will receive their time and investment from their AI go-to-market teams. So a couple of things about what we see with the infrastructure vendors themselves and their partnering strategies. First, we see that AI infrastructure vendors, those providing servers, storage, networking, are more influential in AI solutions than they have been perhaps in recent years in other types of solution areas. So there's a number of market factors at play there, given the still kind of immense demand we're seeing with backlogs in the multiples of billions of dollars. Even getting access to this type of infrastructure can be difficult, and having partners who are able to deliver on those infrastructure needs is becoming really important. We also see that in the infrastructure space, I think there's often in the past a predisposition to say that all infrastructure vendors are providing more or less the same thing. In AI, that's ultimately not true today. When you're looking at things like customers, their business goals, their sustainability goals, their outcomes, the designs of these systems, and the immense amount of power that's going to be consumed by these systems lead to innovations and designs that can save and make really significant impacts on a company's sustainability or perhaps lack thereof in some cases. Also, the infrastructure vendors can ultimately have a significant influence over the ability of data to be organized, to be used efficiently, maximizing the data throughput in these system designs, whether that's related to networking or accessing data through various storage systems, is extremely complex and an area that I think we're still seeing a lot of refinement and innovation in. That's certainly not a bland area that everyone can provide the same value in. So there's certainly influence in the fact that a lot of innovation is going into these systems today. The vendors these infrastructure vendors, their value creating solutions that can be replicated across verticals and use cases. So that's something vendors are valuing from their partners. Part of that is because infrastructure vendors have been burned in the past. So taking lessons they've learned from partner go-to-market on cloud, IoT, and edge, where they have tried to be maybe the end-all, be-all piece of the design. They've tried to make point solutions for individual use cases, is something that's burned many infrastructure vendors in the past because they simply don't have the scale to develop the industry, execute on that effectively. So we see in these AI go-to-market partner teams, certainly valuing partnerships where another firm can bring this vertical expertise to the table, that the infrastructure vendors themselves can serve as a basis for use cases that are broad. But these data companies, model companies, cloud, co-location partners can help them take that a step further. So what I would say, if we take a look at the quotes on the right side of the slide here, these are coming from conversations that we've had with alliance leaders at one of the top AI infrastructure vendors. The feedback that we're receiving is that these vendors are leaning into partners that are making meaningful investments with them from a go-to-market standpoint. So what does that mean? It can mean that they're working together to run customer workshops, working together on building customer proof of concepts. In that transition point from proof of concept to proving the value, the time to value, and the outcomes of a solution. And these vendors are very clear that ultimately not every partner that wants to participate is going to be able to get a seat at the table. They really need to prioritize at this point and be aligned on the amount of go-to-market investment that they're willing to go in on together. So that's certainly playing a role. And like Patrick said, being a tech agnostic provider is a bit of a farce at this point. And we see that in terms of these partnerships with systems integrators and the like, that there is certainly ways that partners can help infrastructure providers progress even farther. So how do they do that? One is partnering for go-to-market motions in ripe customer segments. A great example of that would be the MSP / maybe tier 2 cloud provider or next wave CSP customer segment. These are companies that are going to consume vast amounts of infrastructure to create AI-driven offerings that other enterprises will consume. So that's a great example where we see, for example, SI and infrastructure vendor partnership, where they're realizing that they can work together to, not just target one enterprise, but target these companies in between who are going to be, hosting many of these AI solutions on behalf of enterprises. And there's a lot of headway being made in that type of joint go-to-market approach. I would say the other key area we see is the industry expertise point of view. So taking that broad infrastructure solution to the next level, and making the adjustments that are required to bring it to the industry point of view. I think computer vision is a great example there, right? It has applications in nearly every industry, and the foundation and ISV tech partners within that solution might be more or less the same, but there's some additional vertical specific expertise that the infrastructure vendors are looking to bring in on top of that. So I think from here, jump ahead.
Yeah, we'll go to Q&A. I just want to throw one thing out there, and we've got a couple questions already in the queue, but everything that we've been talking about today is all based on the research that we're doing that has increasingly been focused on ecosystems. And we have sort of three different building blocks for that. One is, of course, the relentless stream of individual company analysis that we provide every single quarter on the companies that we cover at TBR across all the different practices, the three that are here and then the two that aren't on this webinar. So we look at each one of the companies individually. Secondly, we've been building out a sort of a matrix, looking at the relationships between services companies and OEM services companies and cloud companies, sort of a 2x2 matrix view of what those relationships looks like in terms of revenue, in terms of headcount, in terms of certified headcount, and in terms of investment and acquisitions and all that. And then the third part would be what we call voice of the partner and voice of the customer, and then customer search, research all the way around, where we go out and we talk to people, we interview them. It's much more qualitative. It's much more, it's a lot of where these quotes have come from in here, where we've talked to people across the ecosystem, what the buying patterns are, what the needs are. And the voice of the partner is sort of a blend of the second and third of those streams. So with that, let's go to the Q&A. Haley?
Yeah, so the first question that we have for the team is, where do you see data cleansing and the importance of such when it comes to Gen AI initiatives? Importance of clean data? Are companies going through data cleansing initiatives prior to being able to kick off Gen AI?
Yeah, I think I can start in. I think in terms of that early adoption, it was very, the intent was to be quick, to get a solution that didn't touch proprietary data, didn't, wasn't unmonitored in terms of how it was used with those early use cases, so that it could be, you can gain experience. Everybody knows data cleansing will need to come, and I think that's part of this next phase of the Gen AI market, of really looking at the data strategy, the platform, those longer term things that need to be put in place to get the more meaningful use cases up and running. But for those early ones, I think the intent was to use a co-pilot, or to use something where there's still oversight and you can catch some of the more critical errors and provide feedback and have that improve over time without having bad decisions made without that oversight. That's part of what's being gone through at this point. I think there's never a perfectly cleansed data set. I think that's the other realization that enterprises have. So finding other means, that there's a whole market for automated tools that can help. There's testing and RAG techniques for the models, that I think that's an ongoing challenge and process, rather than the data's clean, so now we can move forward with that clean data set.
Yeah, and I think, the short answer from the services perspective is, sure, lots of companies, lots of enterprises went ahead and kicked off a Gen AI program, and then they got nowhere, and it wasn't going to go to scale until they actually cleansed the data. But I think it's Informatica's line is like, everyone is ready for AI except your data. And I think that's completely true. And we hear it again and again and again. And the image that comes back to me, of course, is of everyone talks about data lakes for so long. It's really not the data lake anymore that matters. It's like your municipal water system? Like, do you have a good filtration at the end of that data lake? What's coming out the other end? So lots and lots and lots of consultancies and IT services vendors are focused on that clean data. But it is one of those must-haves that isn't necessarily something that everyone wants to pay for right up front, because it's not the most exciting part of a Gen AI implementation. It's like change management. It has to happen. Nobody wants to pay for it, but you're not going to get anywhere unless you do it. And we had another question, Haley?
Yeah, the next question. And if anybody else has any further questions, feel free to throw them in that Q&A box now. Our next question is, what can companies do to partner more closely and drive more revenue with the hyperscalers?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of different answers to the question. So it depends on the kind of use case and the technology, I think, in a lot of ways, because for the more mature technologies, the underlying platform and specifics of that matter less than having capability to find the right deployment method, to work with a number of different options, have them integrate together. So I think that's part of where, for enterprise apps or things that are more established, being able to work across all of the different platforms, whether it's with a specific cloud delivered solution, whether it's as a service partner, being able to kind of mix and match, I think, is really important. With the more emerging technologies around, things like around Gen AI, I think for most enterprises, they're not looking to have multiple different options. They're looking for one end-to-end solution that they know will work together. And so it's kind of more platform dependent. So being very focused around, a Gen AI security solution for the automotive industry running on AWS, specializing in that is going to give you, a nice lane to participate, build up that book of business. So being very targeted with the earlier stage solutions, I think, is the right approach, and one that for whether it's AWS or Microsoft or Google, they're looking for that kind of trusted roster of the end-to-end solution that they can go out and be confident deploying for customers. So I do think it depends. Eventually, I think the life cycle of technology, it'll be more about customer choice and mixing and matching, and we're seeing that to some degree with some of the choice of models from hyperscalers, being able to leverage multiple different models within the same solution and having it work together is a focus right now. But for services or for some of the smaller ISV partners, I think specializing is the best way to partner and get into the hyperscaler go-to-market strategy.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, looking at the IT services companies and the consultancies, bringing a dedicated team in particular that understands the sales motions of the hyperscalers, understands the sales compensation. Not to say that, it's not like if you're a McKinsey, your sales part, you don't even have a sales team, but if you're McKinsey, your sales compensation is not going to look anything like AWS's. But if you know how they're actually being compensated, how they're actually going to market, that makes all the difference in whether or not you can partner with them smartly. And then the other thing we hear again and again is bring them something new. It's a little I don't know, it's cliche or kind of annoying, but like the hyperscalers can constantly say, just bring us something new. And that, I think, is what the IT services and companies and the consultancies actually have to do. The only way that an Azure is going to know the difference between any of the big four firms is when those big four firms show them something that they should. And by them, I don't mean them, Azure, the entirety of Microsoft. I mean the people that you're working with on a sales engagement, on a pursuit, on an opportunity. They have to really be able to tell the difference between all of the different IT services vendors and consultancies that are out there. It really is about making sure that your technology partners are able to sell your business, not just trying to sell them yourself.
All right, another question. How do you see SAP evolving in this space with their Joule focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great example of that front-end application that's really driven around the agentic type of solution. I think it's going to be really important. It's still definitely kind of maturing and developing, and there's still not only the capability, but the pricing model, how that fits in long-term, how it fits into their ongoing strategy to encourage S4 migrations. So I definitely think it's a direction that we're going to see more of. But even as you saw, if you look at the Microsoft Copilot experience, probably the longest track record to evaluate. There is questions around the general kind of productivity benefit as a long-term driver for the monetizing those solutions. We start to see some apprehensiveness from customers around just making people more efficient. It's very difficult to measure and justify that long-term. So I think the pricing model for Joule and for other similar agentic Copilot type solutions is going to be important. And again, part of that overall ecosystem of the business case coming together and making sense long-term financially and strategically for enterprise customers is really where the rubber meets the road for delivering on the promise of Gen AI.
And we've got another question. This one's actually a two-parter. So part one, of the big SIs or smaller boutiques, do you have insights on which ones have a focused practice on data cleansing, given this will become a key element of successful Gen AI outcomes? And the second part, are there specific industries driven by regulatory requirements that would have a higher propensity to data cleansing?
Well, let me say, I'm going to need to answer that first one directly to the person who asked it. With a little bit more research, but I will say off the cuff, the two companies that come to mind right away are the ones that have had the most well-established data analytics and artificial intelligence practices for the longest time, and that would be EY and Infosys. And I'm picking EY and Infosys, EY very specifically, because a long history of doing AI, really ahead of everybody. And then Infosys with Cobalt and a lot of other things they've developed over the years. And what I think is really striking about that, they both came to my mind, they're also actually partnering increasingly. So from a competitive, just to step out of the ecosystem view for a minute and into the competitive view for a minute, something to be worried about if you're not EY or Infosys is that those two companies working together, in particular being able to tackle this problem with the well-established capabilities and expertise they have in this, could be a real competitive threat to a lot of others. But I will come back to the person who asked with some other examples on that. Part two, are there specific industries driven by regulatory requirements, higher propensity? Maybe counterintuitively, I'm going to say no, because the industries that have the higher regulatory or the greater regulatory oversight and burden, those industries have lived with that for forever. There's no industry that all of a sudden is now under greater regulatory scrutiny. So their data, I don't know what to call it, the data mindset, the data that they've been collecting, the integral data to running their operations, the way that they have managed data for forever hasn't changed significantly because of regulatory requirements. So their need for cleansing is not going to be any different than a less regulated industry. Although when we talk about that, we're really talking about variations of degree, because every industry to some degree is facing some kind of regulation. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it just made me think about, I was listening to an AWS summit from, I think mid last year, it was a Fed summit, and they said, that a lot of the data issues that commercial verticals deal with, they have fewer of them because they've already been cleansing and protecting and managing data very actively. And so adding AI on top of that, it's already a better platform to take advantage of it rather than industries with more lax requirements around data.